morning and good afternoon and good evening to everybody attending this webinar today with myself, Kathryn Williams from KMint in Australia, and my esteemed guest, Tim Williams from the USA. Very excited to speak to you about the value-based pricing model that Tim and I have spent many years working on. We understand this model and what it delivers to our clients very well. These KMint webinars, as many of you attending have attended in the past, are a 1 hour bite size, full of gold nuggets, helping you to look at what else you can deliver in your revenue streams back at your agency. So I hope that today you can get your pens ready, take some notes. There will be a recording that you will be entitled to view as well after the event if you've forgotten anything. We'll have some Q&A at the end as well, so you'll have the opportunity to ask Tim and myself any questions that you see fit as you go through, and you might hear something that we say that just doesn't work for your agency or doesn't make sense. So please, as you think of those questions, type them into the panel below. You'll see the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen. If you miss out and you don't get a chance to speak to us, we will receive those Q&As and respond to you after the event as well. So without further ado, let's get started. I've chosen a Picasso theme for today. And I looked up before the webinar today, how much would it cost for a Picasso? And it kind of ranged from $120,000 to $140 million. So I thought it was quite apt today to use that as a outside of our industry, but close to our industry example to set the scene. We obviously are not paying Picasso for his time and materials to produce his art. So it's about the value that is delivered. So if we just click to the next slide, and we'll have a look at what we're going to focus on today. It's just 3 points, which is classic for all of these 1 hour sessions, keeping it very top line, but giving you enough to actually get started. I'm going to just talk briefly about buyer psychology. So this is about us as consumers, but also our procurement and our client marketing directors and their staff, and even in our own team, the way we think about price. Then we're going to pass to Tim, and he's going to take us through his pricing stack. So really exciting, different models you may have seen before, but again, just hear from Tim directly on how this can be employed within your business. And I'm going to finish up with the good, better, best, the GBB model, which you should be using anyway, regardless of which way you go with value-based pricing, offering your client choice, and then Q&A at the end. Okay, so let's get started on the first one. Tim and I, as you know, and maybe in the next slide, we are going to start looking at the buyer psych. So click on. So buyer psychology, next one. This is about the art of price negotiation. And it starts with you, which is why you're attending this session. And it's up to you to then educate your team. We always have a task, there's always a scope, and then you have a choice of which model you're going to apply for compensation. So this is where I'll come back to, I'll circle back at the end, that you're looking at all of these, and there'll be other, I actually use a matrix for this, but it's for you to use your brain and your knowledge and your expertise to create a matrix around the task that we're delivering, the scope of work, and that's who you're using within your team, the model you're going to offer as compensation, and then how do you articulate that to your client so you're talking about the impact you're making for their business. This is often quite new territory for them as well. So if we move to the next slide, this is another example of a simple illustration that you can take back to the agency to carry on this conversation with your team. Many of us in this session, and there's hundreds of you around the world that think rooftop brand pricing. I'm totally a brand person. I'm always going to pay the most because I believe I get what I pay for. I believe in the deliverables the brand is giving me. Translate that into an agency. If you're an award-winning agency, your clients will be expecting possibly to pay more for your expertise in that top-level pricing and the value that they anticipate you will deliver based on your accreditations. Second floor, kind of middle of the road value pricing stuff, which is what we're talking about today. Every agency should be using a value-based pricing model. That's what Tim and I believe, and we're going to show you how others do that already. First floor, this is where we're in the sea of sameness, and it's the bloody ocean of competitive pitch marketing where you're, in the client's eyes, the same as every other agency down the high street. And then basement pricing. Some of your clients and some of your staff will always be thinking, well, it's just going to be response to brief and it's the cheapest price because they can't afford that. You don't know they can't afford that. If you give them the tools and articulate the value you can deliver for their company, for their brand and their consumers, they can then take that up the line and possibly find more budget to spend because the output and the impact you can make for them is significant enough. So get to know your client, get to know who's behind your client that may be able to release extra funds to invest. And again, we'll explore how it doesn't have to take actually extra money right now. There could be other models that will see that flow of revenue come along the line. Speak their language and teach your team how to articulate this as well. So now let's have a look at some of the models. I'm going to pass over to Tim and we're going to walk through his pricing stack. Tim, thank you for joining us today and over to you.
My pleasure. I appreciate being with you all to explore the art of pricing. I often say to audiences who are new to the topic that pricing, unlike costing, is actually a lot of fun. There's a lot of creativity that goes into this. And what's been happening over the last 20 years is there's actually been a revolution in pricing, a global pricing revolution. Now, it's kind of passed us by in professional services because we are one of the few businesses still mired largely in the concept of selling our time and the hourly rate. But in the rest of the business world, there's been an explosion of innovation and creativity in pricing. And it's produced a whole host of really interesting books on pricing. These are kind of my top six. If you had to just start in one place, if you've never read a book fully devoted to value pricing, up in the top row in the center, Implementing Value Pricing by my colleague Ron Baker, who will be part of the series. Great place to start. The bottom left, the green cover, Priceless by William Poundstone, actually made the New York Times bestseller list. So proof positive that the topic of pricing actually can even attract a mass audience. And for the advertising business, we ought to be especially interested in the whole area of pricing psychology. This is behavioral science, this is behavioral economics. And so agencies obviously bring this to bear in the business we do with our clients. We feel like we're in the business of behavior change on behalf of our client organizations with consumers. This is essentially applying behavioral science and pricing psychology to what we do. It's turning the mirror around on our own businesses. And so I'd like to walk you through some of the dimensions of the pricing revolution, give you some prominent examples of what I mean by the pricing revolution. The first and maybe most prominent is what's referred to as dynamic pricing. And this was introduced in the mid to late 1990s by the airline business, by Delta Airlines, quickly copied by hotels. And as you can see, all the examples on the screen here, far bottom left, Disney no longer has a set price when you go into a Disney theme park. It's a dynamic price. It's on a digital reader board. It's constantly changing based on the weather, how full the park is, time of day, time of year, all sorts of external factors that impact the price of admission. There's dynamic pricing at a chain of Australian cinemas. Maybe you've experienced that firsthand. Parking meters in San Francisco and elsewhere. Sports teams use it to fill stadiums. And interesting example from retail, food on grocery store shelves priced dynamically based on expiration date. So closer the food moves to expiration date, the lower the price. So these are all really interesting examples of the price of a product or service changing, sometimes many times during the course of a single day, based on external factors. So another example that dates back actually 100 years, introduced by a man named King Gillette, who invented the safety razor. And his idea was that he would sell the razor very inexpensively, but then charge a lot for the blades. We know this, right? When you go in to buy blades, they're under lock and key. They're probably the most expensive thing in your grocery cart because King Gillette understood that he would make his money, he would make his margins on the second part of the purchase. We've experienced this with a printer. We buy the HP printer for $99, and then each of the color cartridges is $400. That's a good example of two-part. The Nespresso machine, the machine itself, not so expensive. The little pods, very pricey. So as I'm showing you these examples, and hopefully this is what you're doing already, I hope in the back of your minds you're thinking, maybe some of these kinds of methodologies might apply to our business. And in fact, we now have examples of all of these pricing methodologies that I'm going to be sharing with you being used by agencies around the world. So it's these are not just examples of pricing that apply to other businesses, other industries, other products and services. They're being used actively in professional services. Subscription pricing. And this is perhaps the most important pricing innovation that's happened in the last 3 or 4 years. It's quite a global phenomenon now. We are used to being able to subscribe to software, but you can now also subscribe to financial planning. You can subscribe to a car, to a Volvo. And you'll like this if you haven't read about it. You can subscribe to a taco at Taco Bell. You can subscribe to a certain amount of food at their restaurant. So lots of things that you wouldn't think qualify for a subscription are being sold that way, including the idea that in the future there are some economists that believe that in the future we will subscribe to most everything. You'll subscribe to your refrigerator. You'll no longer buy your fridge. You'll subscribe to it. Now, this is moving into professional services in a big way. The large consultancies, the McKinseys of the world, derive more than half of their revenue from subscriptions to their intellectual property, to things inside their firms that they package up and offer via subscription. I'm going to show you a specific example of that, a couple examples of that from the agency business that I think you'll relate to even more. Outcomes-based pricing is the idea that the price is set not by the work being performed or not the effort going into the work, but by the outcomes that result from the work. That can be tracked in terms of marketplace results, market effects, and so forth, but not just in the likely places you'd expect it, but in farming. They're based on the yields from a particular kind of seed, so that the seed company is paid based on the yield, the quality of their product. We see outcome-based pricing used a lot by consultancies in lots of their client relationships, and increasingly in our business. And I'm going to be sharing examples of that as well coming up here when I introduce this concept that Kathryn's already mentioned of the pricing stack. So all of these modern pricing practices, and there are many more that I haven't covered, such as congestion pricing and penetration pricing, per use pricing, used now by later, really interesting methodologies that are all being used and experimented with companies of all kinds. And as I say, increasingly professional firms and including agencies. So this is what I mean by the pricing revolution. This is the innovation and creativity being applied to pricing. For us in our business, we've been in the unfortunate habit of confusing costing and pricing. When we simply add up our costs in the form of hours and then convert it to an hourly rate, that is not, an economist would look at that and say, well, that's not pricing, that's just costing, that's just bottom up costing, when the rest of the business world is really engaged in the idea of top down pricing, where we start with the perceived value to the customer, perceived value to the client, we set a target price, and then we determine the cost after we determine the price. So that's pretty backwards from how most of us came up in the business, right? We were taught, no, we get an idea of the scope of the project, the scope of the work. We come back to the office, we sit down with our colleagues, we estimate time and hours, we attach our hourly rate or blended rate, which is even worse. And that becomes our price. Well, that is an outmoded, disproven way to price. And by disproven, I mean it's based on the old labor theory of value, which we're the only business on the planet that really still subscribes to that idea. So what I want to do is introduce you to this idea that we don't necessarily have to provide our clients with hourly rates and our rate card when they ask how do we price our services, how do we approach remuneration. I would like you to consider the idea that charging for your time and by the hour is really a suboptimal way of capturing the tremendous value you create for your clients. There's no correlation between time spent and value created. I'm sure you'd all agree with that. You can solve an important client problem in a matter of 5 minutes. So should you send them a bill for 5 minutes of your time? That doesn't correlate, it doesn't compute. So when we take what we do and convert it to units of time, that's the wrong container for knowledge work. What we sell isn't time and effort and activities, it's solutions to business problems. It's expertise. It's the reason why, as Kathryn said, a Picasso can sell for
140
I guess
million.
not much money when it was created in its time, and now millions and millions, hundreds of millions. So when you're asked for, hey, could you provide our rate card? I'd like to see us come back and say, well, we don't really have a rate card. We don't charge by the hour because we don't believe that's what you're buying. We don't believe that what you're buying are efforts and activities. We believe you're buying solutions to business problems. So what we have in place of a rate card is what we call a pricing stack. So you've heard the concept of pricing stack in terms of technology stack, software stack. Same concept. It's a variety of ways that you can price your services that are not tied or tethered to the hourly rate. And what I have on the screen here is a prototype of a pricing stack. I wouldn't advocate that you adopt all of these methodologies, but I'd like to see you experiment with some and to do some test and learn, because the idea of pricing and billing by the hour, I will make this bold prediction, will pretty much completely disappear within the decade. It's clearly on its way out as a pricing methodology, and not only among agencies, but among law firms, accounting firms, architectural firms, any of the professional service firms that are in the habit of billing by the hour. And I would say, and for some reason this is particularly pronounced in Australia, the Australian law firms are marching away from the hourly rate about as fast as they can. There's a headline in the Financial Review every other week, it seems, about another law firm or another set of clients that are demanding that law firms discontinue that practice because smart companies realize that they're not getting the value that they're being charged for. So let's go. I'd like to walk you through specific examples of the various elements of the pricing stack in action, and these are all from the agency world. So, for example, royalties. What would that look like in an agency environment? Well, this is one of the early Bluetooth headsets, the Jawbone brand, that was introduced by an agency that doesn't believe in billing for its time. Instead, the agency asked to be paid sales royalties on this product. And as I say, this was at least in the US, the first into the market in the Bluetooth headsets. And I circled back with this agency after they'd been through this work, and they reported that they earned about a 30% margin just on the sales royalties, and that was their sole basis of compensation. So royalties on sales, interesting way of being compensated. Now, there are lots of resistances that are running through your mind about, and they're understandable, about, yeah, but we don't have complete control over that, and what if something else goes wrong and that we can't really impact. Those are natural kinds of concerns and issues that we would have, but there are ways to navigate around all of those. And the reason that we want to is because what we're trying to do with these pricing methodologies is we're trying to achieve better alignment of economic incentives. If you think about it, with the hourly rate system, there's a misalignment of economic incentives, because what the client wants less of, time, hours, we want more of, and vice versa. So what we're trying to do with these various elements of the pricing stack is align our incentives so that what's good for the clients is good for us. They sell more product, we earn more money, etc. What would it look like to charge for part of what you do via subscription? Now, I'm not suggesting that you could move all of your business to a subscription model, although there have been notable examples of law firms and accounting firms that have done this very thing. The only way you can hire them is by subscribing to their company, to their service. So they're all in. But let's look at the idea of maybe social media community management as a product or a service that you could package up and offer via subscription. So you've got various versions of the program, kind of a small, medium, large. The client receives different levels of outputs and deliverables, but it's served up as a subscription product where the client is not paying for your time or your effort. They're paying you a monthly subscription fee. And that there are other things that are good candidates for this, which would include performance dashboards, analytics reporting, any of the things that you do kind of on an ongoing recurring basis with your clients. Some of those are good candidates to package up and offer via subscription as a new revenue stream or an alternative revenue stream. What would it look like to employ dynamic pricing? Well, this is an example from a firm in London we worked with that has a CRM offering, among other things. And as you can see here, as the time decreases, the price increases for executing the CRM program. That's a great example of dynamic pricing that playing out in an agency environment. Usage-based is the idea that instead of providing work for hire, that's a legal term in the US. I don't know that it has the same exact meaning in your part of the world, but it's this idea that when you do the work, client pays for it, they own it, work for hire. Well, you don't necessarily have to agree to that. There are certain classes of work that could be a good candidate for licensing. So examples are digital platforms that you build for clients, or apps, or even we've seen websites. We've seen clients, digital development firms, build websites not as a work for hire project, but rather at no expense to the client. Rather, the client then pays a licensing fee to then use the website. That then includes all the website maintenance and so forth. So pretty interesting way to, again, just kind of shift some of your revenue away from pay us for our time to, why don't you license this? You rent it, you can rent it, you don't have to buy it. It's going to cost you a lot less money to rent it. It's this idea that not everything a client obtains from an agency needs to be 100% owned. Some of it can be rented or least, and that's going to save them some money. They don't have to pay the full cost of development, so it can be a strong economic benefit to them. Equity, this one's kind of scary, but it's the idea that there are certain opportunities that come along where you could take a small equity stake in a client organization as part of your compensation. It would be rare to have equity form the basis of all of your remuneration. You'd want to keep it to, probably under 10%. That what's normal is, 1 or 2%, especially in large companies. But this is an interesting way of aligning economic incentives and aligning certainly interests with your client. And in high growth industries, like the example I have on the screen, a cannabis company, this can be really interesting. You have to be careful and selective, but it can be interesting. So what we preach is this idea that you want to do test and learn with the pricing stack, right? We're trying to move away from a single monolithic way of pricing based on cost to a more diverse way of thinking about how you price. So you have multiple revenue streams. You make your money in several different ways. Outcome-based is, again, the idea that you will derive your revenue based on the way the project or deliverable performs in the marketplace. This is Peet's Coffee and Tea. It's an American coffee brand. They had never had an e-commerce website before, so they approached Razorfish, the Publicis unit, and Razorfish comes back with a pretty interesting proposal, which is, we will build your website for free, for nothing. We won't charge you anything to build your website. We'll do it all at our own expense. We'll cover all the hard costs, of course, all of our own labor costs. But then when it goes live online, we'd like a % of sales. So again, you wouldn't want to do this with every client that comes along. You'd want to be selective and careful about it. But Peet's Coffee and Tea at the time was a very established brand, good reputation, kind of low risk. The agency was pretty confident that the e-commerce version of selling packaged coffee and tea online was going to work, would be successful. And they obligated the client to a 3-year contract because they knew their break-even point wouldn't hit till about 18 months in. But with the right kinds of opportunities, an outcome-based approach can be really quite interesting. We've seen lots of examples of this. A Southern California agency representing a luxury car brand, instead of hours and time spent, they were paid $57 for every car sold in North America. We saw another agency launch a new tequila brand in the US. Instead of pay us our rate card, they said pay us $2 for every case sold. A chain of LASIK eye clinics where the agency said pay us $19 for every procedure performed. I mean, these are all real examples where the agency had obviously done their homework. They're not just guessing. There's some science behind the $57 per car. You go back and you calculate the price that you think is fair for the work you're doing. You kind of know what the sales figure is for a 100-year-old luxury car company, and you just do the math. And so why would you do that? Well, because you're presenting to your client a compensation methodology that, as I've said multiple times now, really aligns the interests of the two firms. And they can be very successful relationships. That agency and company are in their 7th year of working on that approach. Output-based is a increasingly important pricing methodology that I'm guessing some of you have already encountered or maybe already do. I'd imagine that many of you already do this with project pricing. So it's the idea that you're going to price the output and that you're going to price the deliverable, not the hour, so that you're lining up on your proposal the specific outputs and deliverables, and you attach a price to the deliverable, irrespective of the hours spent. So that's output-based pricing. But what's happening is, on a global scale, large global marketers, the Unilevers of the world, are pretty much demanding to work with their agencies this way. And so this is the idea that you are going to have in effect, a database of outputs so that you know what you should charge for a specific deliverable, and you're just not falling back on, well, we'll just keep track of our time and send you a bill. There's a big global kind of surge in interest in this methodology, output-based pricing. Project Points is an interesting pricing innovation that was pioneered, for some reason, mostly by PR firms. You can Google this and, points-based pricing, and you'll see lots of examples. You'll see books written on the topic. And this is the idea that instead of pricing based on hours, you're going to assign a point level, a point value to a specific deliverable. And the point value is determined not just based on an estimate of time that would be spent, but degree of difficulty, complexity, uniqueness. Different factors would play into the points that would be assigned to each of the deliverables. And this may seem like kind of a obscure way to think about pricing, but this is how Procter & Gamble works with many of its lead agencies, as they use the points pricing approach. So it can work in almost any kind of environment. Agile sprints is yet another kind of recent methodology that we've seen. And this is the idea that coming from the Agile framework, where a sprint is a predetermined kind of time box period of time during which a specified piece of work will be accomplished. So the price is attached to the sprint, not to the time spent or the people or the hours devoted, but to the sprint itself. And there are interesting examples of agencies that have moved their entire business to sprint-based pricing. And it's, especially for digital agencies and those firms that are already working inside the Agile framework, it's pretty interesting approach and methodology. And last but not least, on the pricing stack, at the very top of the stack here, I have this idea of fixed price options. And this is the argument that and I do firmly believe this, that we should always present not just a single choice, not just a single price, not just a yes or no, not just to take it or leave it, but we should always present our price in the form of options. So this is an example I have on the screen of a website redevelopment. This comes out of Canada. Option A is comprehensive redesign. Option B is innovate and differentiate. Option C is the total package. And you can see the difference in what you get. There's a little icon rating system, and then a fixed price that you can see at the bottom. And the reason we want to do this, and by the way, all your clients offer options. All of your client organizations, they all of their products and services, they all offer options, almost without exceptions. I mean, you take your car to the car wash this weekend, you will see options. If you want and Kathryn's going to talk about this, the good, better, best. But so she'll get into it a little bit more detail. But what I want to advocate for here is that you should never present a single price ever for anything. That you should always present options for a project, for a campaign, for the whole, for a big full year retainer, for new business, for current clients. There should be no exceptions. You should always present options. Okay, I guess I made my point there. So what we're doing with the pricing stack here is we're moving away from uniform pricing, which is just adding up our cost or a cost-based calculation in some form that is not any kind of creative thinking applied. It's simply a calculation. Instead, we want to move to lots of different revenue sources. Imagine that the different sections on this pie chart all are different methodologies from the pricing stack. And what you have then is a variety of ways you earn revenue. And the economic argument for this is the same as for you as an individual saving for retirement. When you invest your money for retirement, because you're all putting away millions for those golden years, right? We would never invest all in one thing, would we? We wouldn't say, well, I just want to buy gold, or just international stocks, or just one thing. We would never do that. And why is that? Because we know that by diversifying our in retirement portfolio, we'll earn a higher return. So the same is true with our what I call our pricing portfolios. If your pricing portfolio has a variety of risk, low, medium, high, different forms of risk, different methodologies from the pricing stack, overall you'll earn a higher return on your year-end margin, in effect. So the firms that earn a 40% year-end net profit margin, you'd like that, right? This is how they do it. They are able to do that because they're engaging in a deliberate variable pricing approach versus putting all their eggs in one basket. So this goes to the spirit of test and learn. Some of the most notable agencies that we consider success stories when it comes to pricing have the attitude that every new client is an opportunity to do something different, to try something different. I mean, that is a really interesting paradigm or way to look at pricing, isn't it? That we don't ever want to price a client the same way twice. We want to do something that's never been done before. I mean, wow, how's that for injecting creative thinking into pricing? So when you think about the new business process and all the hours and the time and the effort and the late nights and the, pizza that, brought in at midnight for practice, developing new business presentations, practicing and, rehearsing. And well, how much of that time was spent thinking about, well, how should we price this? I mean, virtually no time at all. We don't think about it at all. We just assume that, oh, we'll hand off to the finance department. They'll run the numbers. Well, no, what if we devoted 30 minutes in the new business process to the question, how could we get paid by this client in a way that has nothing to do with the time we spend on the business, in a way that correlates instead to the value that we're going to create for them? You spend 30 minutes, and if you employ the brain power of multiple disciplines against that question, you come up with some really interesting ideas. We view pricing not as a finance function. We view it as a multidisciplinary strategic decision. And some of the best ideas when it comes to pricing have come from creative directors or heads of strategy or people that normally might not have much to do with finance. Certainly finance is involved, but we want pricing to be a multidisciplinary infusion of creative thinking into the question of how can we get paid for the value we're about to create. So I'm going to finish up my section and hand back to Kathryn here in a minute. But learning to price more creatively is like learning a new sport, right? You get better and better with practice. I mean, think about the first time you ever tried to golf. I mean, I'm still a bad, lousy golfer, but I'm a little better than when I started. I can play tennis a little better than when I started. And it's that same thing. You feel a little clumsy when you first start, and you feel like, well, I don't really know what I'm doing here. Well, the place to start is you just jump in and you experiment with every opportunity, and you get better and better with practice. So, Kathryn,
Great.
I'll toss back to you.
I've got this huge notepad. So maybe click to the next slide for me, Tim. So I'm going to pick up on what Tim said. And before I move to that, I just want to set the scene for everyone attending, because most of you filled in the questionnaire on the way in. A lot of what Tim's saying here, and I'm picking on the last couple of things about involving the wider team as an infusion and allocating some time when you are putting forward your proposition from a compensation perspective, creative strategists and the people who actually have access to data even on the client side. So trying to understand the impact you're going to make for the client and offering choice. And I'm going to take you through that. So many of you don't have that, the luxury, or we haven't initiated within your agency to have a pricing council. I think I'd like to recommend that. And the final part of today's session is to challenge you on a 90-day sprint, 90-day plan within your business to define what it is you're going to do differently based on everything you've learned in this session, and be able to articulate that to your own team and therefore onto your clients, and define the compensation models you think you're going to roll with. So that's number one, making sure, and just responding to on your way in, registering questions. Find out who it is within your organization who will be spending that 30 minutes each time a proposal goes out. Make it a new service that you provide internally to make sure that you take a little bit of a risk. And I guess that is that low, medium and high risk, and try something differently. Quite a few of you, it's about 50-50, said that you already have value-based pricing within your agency. So the 50% that don't, today's session is to whet your appetite. What else did I see? So the other question was about your overruns and write-offs of the hours. Now, we can be forgiven a little bit because many of us, and actually everybody who's registered today, PR, digital, brand, comms, experiential, we all have ERP systems. I know many of you are using modules that track your hours. Even the media agencies are using programs with the drop-down menus with hourly rates for people. So we can be forgiven a little, but what we're suggesting is you offer an alternative to that. The final piece was what's stopping you? And mostly the answers were, well, we've got legacy clients, or we've got procurement, or actually we just haven't given it a whirl yet. So again, in the next 3 months, I'd like to see you make a plan, pull those people that you think are the right people to create this wise council to talk about, whether it be the models that Tim rattled off. But for me, the two-part pricing, that totally works for a lot of the businesses here. And we got the example of the razors with the blades. Well, it could be exactly as we saw with Razorfish. Use the base. We've got a website. Pick one job in the year that you do that site for free, and then you might license it potentially. And there you go. You're starting on the value-backed pricing model. Equity. Again, maybe you suggest to your business, your colleagues that have the authority, we're going to take one equity-based piece of business this year. What would it be? Maybe you go and search for that your whole organization has a connection with, that you think we want to invest in that. So go and approach them. Don't wait to pitch. The agile sprints, that was great with digital agencies, being able to work on that. I could see that working very well. Subscriptions and McKinsey's were cited with the intellectual property. So those of you that attended the Sharon Torek webinar with me last year about innovating within your own agency, hanging on to that IP, registering it, owning it, and then royalties was another one. Many of you work with clients that have their products, their product base. So this is very interesting to me. And I've worked with agencies to move the investment from the client side to a marketing spend when they pay you, up to the cost of sales or COGS for them in their P&L, which then attributes to the royalties to the movement of the units of their products. So yeah, as Tim said, this is not something you do every day. It's something you need to work on to pull that team, to infuse it as part of your DNA. It differentiates you from the other agencies down the high street. So let's move to the next slide, Tim. So if you're currently doing the response to brief, and in this case, I'm just using a simple example, it's a $5,000 website, and the client's asked you to put a prop forward, an existing client, or it's a new proposition, or it's a pitch, and you go, yes, here's my response. I see this happen all the time, and here's the response to brief with the attached rate card. It's not really going to get you much further than the hourly rates that we've been doing for centuries. It's not what any of the other businesses that we're talking about, so lawyers and accountants, particularly management consultants, would never just put across one proposition, because it leaves the client with just a yes or a no. And if they say no, they'll pick the other agency. So this is not a good idea. So let's click to the next slide. What about if you offer them this, where they're going to get the website plus some other things perhaps they hadn't even asked for in the request for proposal? So we're going to do some maintenance, annual maintenance on that, and we're also going to offer them an SEO package. So of course it's going to cost them more. I've just roughed some figures here. And now you've given them a choice of two things. And picking up on some of the options that we looked at, I loved the example that we talked about where we're looking at experimenting and being a little innovative here and test and learn. Perhaps this one, 6,500, maybe we might do an afterpay scenario here. So, we've seen the advertisements now for probably quite a few months here in Australia of all these other ways to receive it now, pay later. And you pay through the nose for that. It's like credit. So again, it's not something agencies are just readily doing it, but you could offer that as an option, or you might pick any of these other ones, the outcome-based, where, that just makes sense. It's per unit. The car example was great. Also the eye clinic. And work out it's $50 per sale through the site, for example. This is nice, and it plays to my strengths because I'm really good at doing the financial metrics behind it all to track it and set it up. So maybe let's move to the next slide, and then we've now got 3. I'd always go with 3 as a choice, because back to the house image that I set up at the beginning, where I'm always going to choose that all-day sucker. I like the big one. I think I'm getting what I pay for. I want everything. Thank you very much for thinking of all those things I might need. And I'm open to your suggestion of an alternative, because that's my psychology. That's how I feel about trusting you and what you've put in front of me. On the other hand, there'll be quite a few that are going to go with it. No, just response to brief. I'm a junior. I have no discretion. That's my budget. That's all I can do. Thanks very much. So they'll pick the one on the left. However, a lot of us are in the middle of the road here, and we can't really go for the big one because we never would. Even if we're in Bali haggling over an anklet bracelet, we would never spend that much. We're also not stingy, and we're not going to just stick there. We can see value in being middle of the road, where we get a little bit more than that lower price option. Not quite everything yet, but we feel comfortable in the middle. You're really giving your clients, your prospects, control over their choice to pick which one suits them, their time and their budget and their rank, or whatever it is that you're actually delivering. If it hasn't got a huge amount of value for their end, they're going to pick something towards the lower end of the spectrum. So again, I think this is just essential for what we're saying. And in the next 30 days, you will probably, off the pricing stack, pick a couple. I know a lot of you would have liked some of those options that Tim has put forward. Learn a little bit more about each one, and then take a risk. You only need to do 1 or 2, and then you'll get some momentum and test and learn iterations and go forth. I think the subscription for me was an easy one, 2-part and outcome-based. Next slide, because I think we're coming up to the end now, and really just summarising what the takeouts were, and then I'll flip to Q&A. So just understand your own feeling. I've worked with a lot of agencies where the BDM or the account manager who are putting across the costings, the compensation models, they personally feel the client can't afford. And in fact, several agencies I've worked with said, our clients can't afford that. Clients, plural. And I'm here to tell you, not all clients are stingy and can't afford. Some of them can. So it was actually a mindset within the agency. So your mind is the biggest trigger here, being able to stretch your mind with what you've learned today, put it into play, and you can make it work. You've got a nice pricing stack that Tim's explored for you, and then offering choice. They would be the main things that I want you to take away today. And then get that council together to help you create some different revenue models for your business, which will get you to that 40% net margin. That's another challenge. So if you're not generating 40%, you're here and you want to be 40, then that's where you've got to go. How are you going to do that this year? Use some of these models and take a risk and structure it with your wise counsel, and you will get there. So let's pass to the audience, and I've got a few questions here, Tim. The first one is actually, how long does it take for an agency to put a proposal together for one of the pricing stack models?
Well, I guess that's certainly going to depend on which of the methodologies you choose. I will admit it's a fair amount of work. I have found myself spending up to a half a day just doing an options, just putting together 3 options. It takes a fair amount of brain power, but I will also say it's always a really good return on investment. The time spent in doing something that is a little more thoughtful and less off the shelf always pays off. If nothing else, you learn from it. So it does take more time for sure, and you got to be prepared to maybe, instead of just some copy and paste some old language you used on the old proposal, you've got to sit down and break completely new ground. So hard to put a exact number on how long any of that takes, but it's going to be 3 times what you used to spend, and you'll get 10 times the return on investment, in my experience.
Absolutely perfect answer, because if I go back to one of the questions on the registering, is how much do you write off in time spent on jobs that you are unable to bill, the write-offs or the overruns. Average, an agency of about 10 staff, not a media agency, in this case it'd be a service-based purely agency, would probably 10 staff, 15, 20 staff, you'd be pushing $50,000 off the table every month in unbilled hours, at least. That's assuming your business is clocking hours. So if you spent that time, half of that time or 30 minutes looking at how you can put a model together, that would be an estimate in my world. The next step is you're conversing with clients. So recently I've had that illustration through a pitch scenario where we put forward several modes of compensation, and we got through to the next round, and now we're talking to procurement. So it can take weeks, but you've got a model or several models that you can roll with. So creating it within your own business, and it's client by client, product or service based, depending on what the client is offering, what's their product or service. But once you've got one, there's a couple of frameworks within inside an agency. I see that can be the starting point to extend on it and be bespoke, customized for other agency clients that might be interested. Another one is coming in here, talk a little bit more about measurement of new methods. So if you're not reaching the profit margin, how do you identify why? And you're negotiating new terms with clients. What evidence do you use for fee increase? Is it just scope? Tim, would you like to go at that? So how will you measure it? I guess it depends on which model we're going to use, really, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's a very practical question, because we're used to defending our price based on our internal costs. This is kind of this will sound like heresy, but I really believe that our costs are none of our clients' business. It's a bit of an aberration in our industry that we've allowed this transparency into our costs, where we've taught our clients that that we will disclose to them the people and the hours, and in some cases, and hopefully you haven't had this happen to you, but them requiring or requesting what do you pay in salary and to these individuals, and what's your benefits program, and what do you pay in overhead, and all of these really obnoxious questions, which are really none of their business. unfortunately, the multinational agencies of the world are the worst offenders, where they have been in the habit of disclosing this information, and it just really doesn't happen in other businesses. I mean, you don't walk into a BMW showroom and say, hey, I really like this new 5 Series and it's just exactly what I'm looking for, but before I can commit to buy it, I need to know, what did it cost BMW to build this car? I mean, we just never have visibility into the seller's costs. So that's a bad habit that we now have to break. Yeah. And the way we do that is by simply saying, we don't believe we're selling our costs to you. We're not selling our hours and our efforts. We're selling the value of outputs and outcomes. And so it's you can defend it based on the actual scope, but not the time spent. If they're asking for deliverables that weren't envisioned, then that's a justification for a higher price.
Yeah, it's a little bit the old model, but the fundamentals are, because our costs have increased over time, we absolutely need to know what our base cost is, and you negotiate value from there. So if you're going to take a loss on that particular piece of business, you will choose that for a reason. You need to be fully conversant as to why you would take that piece of business if you're not going to deliver those margins. But what we're assuming is that all agencies understand their base cost. And from there, we're looking to move beyond that to the value created for a client. And not every job you do delivers huge value. It could be, it doesn't in this particular example. So again, speaking to a client or renewing, the scope is important always, but you need to get under their hood. You need to find out, you need to articulate your questions for them about what's going to shift the needle of performance at their end. This is a conversation you may not have been having in the past. So some clients are up for it, others are not. So again, it's a client by client. And those that attended last week's webinar for the Network One across Europe, we very much looked at how you put this in place internally, getting a cost base. Don't benchmark yourself against the rest of the industry. That's the sea of sameness. You need to be a little different. So we're trying to innovate here and offer your clients choice. They might not necessarily choose the all-day sucker. They might go for the cheaper option. So I hope we've answered that one for you. Final question before we wrap up for today. Tim, what is the best or the most success you've had from a client value stack option pricing model? I think they're talking about the highest success you've seen and which model delivers. I've got that right, Ben. I think that's what you're asking.
That's a really good question. I can answer it in terms of popularity and the methods that I see used most often. First, options, and all of you can always do it. Fixed price options is something you can start doing tomorrow. Literally the next opportunity you have with a current or new client, fixed price options. The subscription is very easy, because all you're doing is taking things that services you already offer, and you're just reimagining them, repackaging them, reframing them as a program that's offered via subscription. So that one's easy to implement. And then the output-based pricing, that is something that I imagine, as I said, many of you probably already do, but that's also something you could do starting tomorrow. Don't quote people and hours anymore. Quote outputs, quote the deliverable, price the product that the client's actually buying, not the person that's doing the work. And those three would be top of the list in terms of things, not only that I think are most popular in terms of agencies using them, but ease of you doing. You could do these things starting tomorrow, as I said.
It's interesting, as you were speaking, Tim, I saw my 3 lollipops and I thought, instead of the little blue bargain basement response to brief, what if we made that the licensing model and the all-day sucker was the response to brief? And then you've got a usage pay in the middle. So this is how you could switch it around, because it's actually cheaper to license, but it means the agency retains the intellectual property of the website, for example, or the social media platform, the campaign, or whatever it might be. And so the flow of cash from the client's perspective is a lot lower, but it could be a lot longer. And I think it was a 3-year commitment that to break even. So again, we can calculate that internally to say, if you choose that blue lollipop, the cheaper option, which is the licensed one, you'll need to sign the 3-year contract. So, but the clients possibly will, because it might be cheaper than buying the all-day sucker today. So, often I think these are really exciting. And my own experience as well, working with agencies on value pricing, on number of units sold. Some of you have got long-term relationships with clients, that trust is there. So now you're inviting them to align their value, what's the performance they're looking for with you, and you'll get access to those figures. One example, it was a farming business where the agency I was representing earned over $500,000 in unit sales from selling this particular product over a 2-year period. They would never have earned that in hours, billing by the hour. So they got a base pay to do the work, but it was all based on sales and calculations we'd done about how much would we be able to share in that gross profit or the revenue of the client's farming product. So it's entirely possible. You need to just trust and believe the other agencies are doing it. Why not us? And put it into play. So look, we've come to the end of the session. I would love to say thank you so much, Tim, for joining us and sharing your information with us today. I really appreciate it, as I know the audience has. If there are any final questions, drop them through and we will come back to you.
Great. Thanks very much. I've appreciated being with you.
Amazing. Well, have a great day and good luck, everyone. Reach out if you have any questions. Bye for now.